My son looked at me and said, "Don't count on a single dime from Dad's 92 million." At the will reading, his face went pale the second he heard my name. Before we go any further, if my story has found you, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see just how far my words can travel. She's still breathing? I figured she'd be gone by now. Maybe we should check her pulse while we're at it. That was the very first thing I heard when I walked downstairs, still dressed in black, still carrying the faint smell of roses from my husband's funeral. The dirt hadn't even settled on his grave before everyone rushed back to the estate. Not to mourn, not to share memories, but to feast, and to circle the fortune. The hallway hummed with chatter, laughter, and the steady thump of shoes through what used to be my safe place. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, holding onto the railing my husband once polished by hand, watching them carve up my life like vultures circling a carcass. "This one's mine." My grandson slapped a bright green sticky note onto the grandfather clock, then onto the leather armchair, then onto the cabinet that held our wedding china. He moved through the rooms like a man in a showroom, claiming prizes he hadn't earned. His sister had her phone out, an app open with blueprints and measuring lines. "Once she's gone, we'll remodel," she said, not even looking at me. "Spa room maybe. Definitely better lighting." I just kept standing there. No one offered me a seat. No one stopped. Then my daughter-in-law appeared, smiling with a tray of champagne flutes. "We're celebrating Dad's legacy," she chirped. "He built an empire, and now it's our turn to carry it forward." From the back someone muttered, "And to clear out the ghosts." The room broke into laughter. My chair at the dining table had already been replaced with a shaky folding chair from the garage. No cushion, one leg ready to give out. They nudged me toward the mudroom. "You'll be more comfortable there, away from all the noise." So I sat in silence, staring at a mop bucket and a broken broom, while balancing a paper plate with dried chicken and overcooked potatoes. No one noticed. No one cared. From the other room, their voices carried loud and clear. "This house reeks of mothballs and death," someone said. "We'll strip the wallpaper, gut the kitchen." My grandson came by, peeling off a neon orange sticker and slapping it on the sideboard right next to me. "This one's mine," he grinned like he'd just won some carnival prize. His sister circled the room again, phone raised, scanning the walls. "We'll turn this into a spa, or maybe a wine-tasting nook." They didn't lower their voices. They didn't even glance my way. I sat perfectly still, holding my teacup with both hands so it wouldn't shake. "Dad said she'd die before him," one of them chuckled. "Guess that was his only mistake." Someone else chimed in, "She made soup." "He built an empire." The laughter grew louder. "Let her rot in the memories," a cousin sneered. "She probably doesn't even know what year it is." My granddaughter piped up, "Can we keep her pension checks if we just forward the mail?" "She's already half dead," her brother said. "Stick her in the garden shed and call it a day." I took a bite of cold chicken. Crumbled in my mouth like chalk, but I swallowed it anyway. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. Instead, I slipped my hand into my sweater pocket and touched the sharp edge of a document I had guarded for years. A bank memorandum, signed and notarized 15 years ago. It named me as co-founder and early investor in the family trust. My name was there in blue ink, not black, the kind of detail that matters in court. They didn't know. They never even asked. Back then, when the company was drowning and bankruptcy was hanging over us like a storm cloud, it wasn't the lawyers or the accountants who saved it. It was me. I sold every piece of heirloom jewelry I had. My mother's emerald necklace, my wedding bangles, even the brooch I wore at our engagement party. I told no one. I just wired the money and whispered to my husband, "Use it, but never let them know it came from me." He never did, not until now. From the next room I heard my son Daniel bragging. "We'll get the lake house. The boat's already under my name anyway." "The Lexus is mine," shouted Chris, my nephew. "Dad promised it to me last Christmas." "I want the Hermes scarves," said my granddaughter Emily. "Even if they're hers, she's not using them." More laughter followed. They were dividing up my skin while I was still living inside it. Someone wandered into the mudroom, spotted me sitting there, and said casually, "There's bottled water in the garage fridge. Maybe grab one, you look pale." Then he left without waiting for an answer. I sat there another hour while they picked apart the art, the land, the memories. Someone even dragged suitcases upstairs, staking claim to the master bedroom for the weekend. One of the girls asked if she could paint it pink. Eventually the champagne ran out, the music stopped, but the smell of greed still clung to the air, heavier than the dust on the drapes. Slowly I stood. My knees ached. I steadied myself on the edge of the sink and looked out the little window above it. The roses my husband had planted along the driveway were starting to wilt. No one had watered them in days. I wondered if anyone even noticed. I walked back into the house. No one asked where I'd been. My footsteps were light like the ghost they already thought I was. But I wasn't done. Not yet. My hand pressed against the paper in my pocket, warm now from the heat of my palm. Let them drink. Let them decorate. Let them laugh. The will was still coming and I had a pulse, loud, steady, undeniable. To them I'm just a burden, a ghost, a shadow in their perfect tale of success. But there's a chapter they erased, a chapter where I saved everything and no one ever knew. 15 years ago the company was collapsing. I remember the night my husband came home late. His tie was loose, his hands were trembling, and the silence between us was heavier than words. He didn't need to say it. The bank had called. The numbers were brutal. Everything was slipping. The clients, the contracts, even the house. "We just need one deal," he muttered, staring into the fireplace as if the flames could burn away his shame. "Just one. If we can land those investors in New York, we'll make it." But there was a problem. To close the deal he needed collateral. Money he didn't have and pride he wouldn't set aside. So I made a choice. That night, while he slept, I opened the velvet box hidden in the back of my drawer. Inside lay the last of my dowry, the diamond earrings from our wedding night, the emerald ring my mother left me, the heavy gold bangles I wore when I first walked into this house as a bride. Every piece carried a memory and I sold them all. Quietly. Without asking. Without telling. The next morning I wired the funds straight into the company's escrow account and told him only one thing. Use it. Don't let them see you fall. He never asked where the money came from. He didn't want to know. That was his way, strong on the outside, silent on the inside. And I stayed behind the curtain. 2 days later the deal closed. The investor signed. The company lived. They called him a visionary. They called him a self-made miracle. They never called me. And yet, that wasn't the part that cut the deepest. A month later I saw the new branding materials. His face was splashed across the front page, bold and proud, with a slogan beneath it. Legacy built alone. I smiled when I saw it, bit my lip and said nothing. But I remember. I remember everything. Even that night I sat at the kitchen table writing out the IPO pitch by hand. He was getting ready for another investor meeting and didn't even know where to begin. The market was shifting, the industry was changing, and he was still pitching like it was 1995. So after everyone went to bed, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat at the table and began to write. I outlined a step-by-step expansion strategy. One tied to supply chain reform, to scalable growth, to shareholder value based on the trends no one else was watching. I'd done this kind of work before in another life. Before the marriage, before the babies, before a business card labeled me homemaker. That night I signed the draft with a name no one would recognize. A harmless pen name, something clean. The next morning I slipped it into an envelope, stamped it and mailed it straight to the office. No return address. Just his name and the company's. 2 days later he mentioned it at dinner. Somebody sent an anonymous proposal. "It's brilliant," he laughed. "Even the handwriting looks like yours." I just shrugged and kept stirring the soup. That proposal became the backbone of their IPO launch 6 months later. It pulled in more than $40 million in new investments. They even hung a plaque in the lobby celebrating ingenuity. His ingenuity. But I didn't mind. Not then. I told myself the family needed one hero and it was easier to let him be the face. It's funny, isn't it? The way women are taught to disappear gracefully. To be proud of being the spine while someone else gets to be the portrait. We're told loyalty is noble, sacrifice is strength. But silence too long turns into erasure. No. Now they walk through my house, taping their names to furniture, talking about legacy like I was never part of it. They laugh at my memory, question my mind, mock my usefulness. They don't know what I gave, what I built, what I hid. Upstairs, in the closet beneath the linens no one ever touches, there's a folder. Inside is the original draft of that pitch. Ink smudged from restless hands, my pen name written in the corner. Folded next to it is a letter from the patent office, linking the strategy to a registered idea. Registered not under the company but under me. I never cashed the royalty checks. They've been coming every quarter for years. I didn't need the money. I needed the quiet. The dignity of knowing what I had done even if nobody else ever did. But now they've pushed me past the line. They've fed me shame, stripped me of memory, called me dead while I was still breathing. So I've opened that folder again. I've spoken with the lawyer. I've hired the handwriting analyst. I've documented every step. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But for truth. Because when we sit in that room for the will reading, and they hear my name tied not just to the trust but to the legacy they thought belonged only to them, there will be silence. For once I'll be loud. And none of them will erase me again. They never even looked me in the eye when they began. It was a Tuesday, just 5 days after the funeral. The house still smelled faintly of lilies and pine from the casket spray. The condolence cards were stacked unopened on the piano, as if even grief was too inconvenient to deal with. But their energy had shifted. Mourning was over. Sorting had begun. Claiming had begun. And the clearing? The clearing started with me. We've decided it's best, Clarissa said, her voice carrying through the room without the slightest attempt to soften it. She can move into the small room downstairs. I blinked. She meant the laundry room. With a tight little smile, she corrected herself. Technically it's a utility space, but there's room for a cot. My bedroom, our bedroom, was already gone. Upstairs I could hear the laughter, the shuffle of drawers opening, closet doors creaking. Someone rolled a suitcase down the hallway. My perfume bottles, my silk scarves, my books, all of them were being shoved into cardboard boxes. Not carefully. Not with care. Just removed. I shuffled toward the stairs and saw the labels. Donation. Outdated. Old lady junk. They didn't even try to hide them. Clarissa's husband, my grandson Andrew, stood there with a clipboard, pointing toward furniture like a man directing a moving crew. That end table's perfect for the cabin, he said to her. A neon pink sticky note landed on the oak top like a bruise. This one's mine. Piece by piece I watched as my memories were claimed. The wedding china. The rocking chair where I nursed Daniel when he was sick. Even the old record player, the one we danced to during blackouts, now wore one of their cheerful stickers. Clarissa turned to me, her polished smile as sharp as glass. She doesn't need a room, she told the others. Just a bed until she's gone. A few chuckles followed. No one spoke against her. One of the younger boys, Ethan I think, though I can't keep track anymore, slipped past the kitchen door and muttered, "If we keep her address we can still cash her pension checks." That joke got laughter. Not from me. So I walked slowly, knees stiff, down to what used to be the laundry room. The smell of bleach and mildew hit me first. A single bulb flickered overhead. In the corner sat a cracked mop bucket and a rusted utility sink. Against the wall, a narrow cot had been pushed flat. No sheets. Just an old moving blanket. That was my new room. My suitcase was already placed beside it. On top sat a dented thermos and a cracked photo frame. I picked it up. Our 30th anniversary. We stood together beneath the rose arbor. His arm around me, my hand pressed against his chest. Behind us the house rose tall and proud. Back then it felt like ours. But they'd yanked the picture off the hallway wall and shoved it behind the refrigerator face down, wedged between a broom and a box of stale granola bars. As if even the memory was too much. Did they think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, that I'd simply forget? But I don't forget. I remember everything. I remember the night my husband carved our initials into the porch rail. I remember cinnamon and vanilla filling the house on Christmas mornings. I remember holding Daniel as he cried over his college rejection, whispering, "You're still enough." I remember baking birthday cakes from scratch, driving to midnight rehearsals, hand-sewing curtains so this house would feel like home. And now I'm just a placeholder. A burden. Something to step over on the way to their inheritance. Later that evening, Clarissa stopped by my cot with a folded towel and a plastic bottle of unscented shampoo. "These are for you," she said, placing them down as if she were donating charity. "We'll have dinner at 7. You can eat after we're done." I nodded. What else could I do? That night, while they sat in the dining room laughing over steaks and wine, I sat alone on the cot, peeling open a tin of soup I had hidden away from the pantry. I had to pry the can open with the tip of a key. They hadn't even left me a can opener. Earlier I overheard them whispering when they thought I wasn't listening. Dad built an empire, one of them said. She built soup. As if nourishment wasn't the foundation. As if warmth and care and sacrifice counted for nothing because it didn't show up in a portfolio. Yes, I built soup. But I also built them. And now they tear me down with giggles, with tape, with tiny neon stickers. The cruelty is never loud. It's quiet. Surgical. Polite. But it cuts just the same. Later, when the house finally went still, I went back to the fridge and pulled out the anniversary photo I had rescued. I wiped the dust from the glass and pressed it against my chest. This had once been my home. I had once been the heart of it. They may think they've erased me, but all they've done is remind me of what I once gave, and what I can still take back. And tomorrow the lawyer calls. And I'll answer with the voice they forgot I still had. It all began with an old folder, leather-bound, worn at the edges. I had kept it hidden under the loose floorboard in the laundry room, my so-called bedroom now, behind a crate of mop heads no one ever touched. Inside were the things they never bothered to ask about because they never asked about me. The morning after they measured my room for a spa conversion, I took that folder and walked 2 blocks in the cold to the payphone outside the pharmacy. They'd shut off my cell service by mistake. But I hadn't forgotten the number. When Mr. Alden answered, I said only, "It's time." He didn't ask what I meant. He simply said, "Come in tomorrow." Mr. Alden had been my husband's lawyer for decades. But what they never knew was that he had been mine long before the marriage turned into performance. Long before I faded into wallpaper and casseroles. The next morning in his office I laid the documents out one by one. First, the joint trust certificate. My name was printed right beside my husband's. Not as a witness. Not as a dependent. As co-founder. Co-executor. Then the investment agreement from First Savings Bank of California, dated 15 years ago. It showed the deposit, my dowry. My mother's emerald necklace. The gold bangles from my wedding chest. I had sold them all quietly when the company was crumbling, to buy him the merger that saved his firm. I never asked for credit. All I asked was for him to survive it. Last, I slid across a bundle of handwritten pages, yellowed, corners curled. Every page in my own cursive. "It's the original proposal," I said softly. "The model for the IPO." Mr. Alden's eyes narrowed. "You wrote this?" I shook my head. I sent it. I sent it under a pseudonym. He presented it as his own. I remembered that night as if it were carved into me. My husband had been pacing the den, glass of scotch untouched on the mantel, every draft rejected by his board. That night, after he fell asleep, I pulled out a pad of paper and wrote until dawn. By morning my fingers were black with ink. I never told him it was mine. I mailed it to our P.O. box with no return address. He took it to the board. They approved it unanimously. It earned him $38 million. And I said nothing. Mr. Alden leaned closer. "Hey, He opened his file cabinet and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was another letter, typed, but signed with the same pseudonym I had used, L. Brightwood. He compared the signature carefully, then looked up. "Do you still write like this?" I nodded. That very afternoon he called in a specialist, a handwriting analyst, from Stanford. They spent 2 hours side by side tracing loops and curves, pressure points and pauses. Later that week the analyst's report came back. A perfect match. 100%. The original pages carried intellectual property clauses. Copyright and authorship were mine. Under federal patent law, the IPO framework was considered an invention. Since it had never been officially transferred and since I could prove authorship, the royalty rights defaulted back to me. Millions, maybe more depending on the span of profit. All mine. Mr. Alden leaned across his polished desk. "You understand what this means?" I nodded. "I don't want the money," I said softly. "Not all of it." "Then what do you want?" he asked. I folded the letter neatly into the folder and stood. "I want my voice back." And for the first time in months I smiled. A small, quiet smile that started in my chest and found its way to my lips. They buried me while I was still alive. They mistook my silence for uselessness, my love for absence, my motherhood for surrender. They thought I had faded like the wallpaper. But I was only watching. Only remembering. I hadn't forgotten who I was. I was the girl who read contracts by candlelight while her husband slept. The woman who taught herself investment law with nothing but a library card. The mother who made soup, yes, but also decisions. Smart ones. And now, while they tripped over themselves to divide a house I helped build, they had no idea the land beneath their feet carried my name. The paper trail was already with the court. By the time they sat down for the will reading, everything would be in place. But first I let them have their party. Their games. Their jokes. Let them laugh over champagne, dancing around the ashes, believing I'd already blown away with the wind. Forgetting me was their final mistake. They made me sit at the far end of the table on a folding chair, of course. God forbid I spoil the polished glow of their wool suits and designer handbags with my old woman presence. The law office was sleek, all glass walls and leather trim, cold in every way. Outside, rain streaked the windows. Inside, the air felt even colder, as though snow might fall at any second. My son Joseph sat closest to the front, legs crossed neatly, his wedding ring gleaming. His wife leaned in, whispered something, and he chuckled just loud enough for everyone to hear. "She'll be dead by next Christmas," he muttered, sipping from a tiny espresso cup. "Don't expect a dime from her." My granddaughter Emily sat tapping at her phone beneath the table. My grandson Andrew was scribbling his signature over and over on a yellow legal pad. None of them looked at me. Then Mr. Alden entered, briefcase in hand, and the room straightened. He always carried the weight of finality. His voice usually meant no more questions. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today we gather to execute the final wishes of Mr. Harold Brightwood, as stated in his legally binding revised will." No one caught the way he leaned on that word, revised. Folders slid across the table. Pages rustled. Then from his case Mr. Alden withdrew a small silver recorder. He clicked it on. My husband's voice filled the room. Slower than I remembered, more tired but calm. "Steady. If my son ever speaks ill of his mother," the voice said, "deduct $1 million for every word." The room froze. The air seemed to vanish, sucked out like a vacuum had sealed us in. Then his voice again, "You know how much he owes." A pen slipped from Joseph's hand and clattered onto the table. Silence pressed down heavy. No one moved. "What the hell does that mean?" Joseph barked, leaning forward in his chair. "That's not real. That's not in the..." Mr. Alden raised one hand, calm as ever, and slid a printed transcript across the table. The heading read, Exhibit A, Verified PIU Transcript. Home Security System, Kitchen, 3 days after the funeral. He began to read. 1. She's still breathing. 2. Thought she'd be gone by now. 3. Check her pulse at the will reading. 4. She built soup. He built an empire. Page after page turned. The tally grew. Total recorded statements spoken ill of his mother, Mr. Alden said evenly. 587,184. The room went dead quiet. That equals $88 million in deductions. Some of those words were colorful. The remaining 3,996,200 were subtracted as discretionary penalty, as outlined in Clause 14C of Mr. Brightwood's addendum. He set down the final page. Remaining inheritance for Mr. Joseph Brightwood, $3,800. Joseph shot to his feet. "This is insane. You can't do this. That woman, she's been a drain for years." "Dad wouldn't." "He would," I said quietly. My first words of the morning. Every head turned. My voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Mr. Alden didn't pause. "Now, as for the primary beneficiary of the trust, the copyrights and the remaining estate assets, Harold Brightwood has left them to his wife, Eleanor Brightwood." He placed a thick folder in front of me. It felt heavier than I expected. Inside were deeds, portfolio transfers, the rights to the intellectual property tied to the IPO model. A second, smaller folder held a deed to an apartment in Paris, and a handwritten letter. My husband's words. "Forgive me for the years I let your light stay hidden. I never forgot. I only hoped someday they would see what I did. And if they couldn't, then let this speak louder than I ever could. You built this with me. Now let the world know your name." Joseph stood frozen, white as plaster. His wife fumbled with her phone, dialing. A lawyer, a therapist, maybe even a priest. I looked around at the faces in that room, people who had rehearsed their victory speeches on the drive over. And I said nothing. Because justice doesn't need noise. It only needs truth. I gathered my coat, the same beige one they called depressing last Christmas, and walked past Joseph, whose fist clenched hard against the polished table. At the coat rack I turned to Mr. Alden. "Will that be all?" He gave a small nod. "Enjoy Paris." And I did, I told myself, but not before turning back to the family I had fed, clothed, sheltered, and finally outlived. "You buried me while I was still thinking," I said steadily. Too bad I had one more idea left. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was bone deep. But I wasn't done. Mr. Alden knew that. He reached for the second envelope. "This," he said, unfolding the packet with careful hands, "pertains to an intellectual property matter not previously disclosed to the family." He spread out a series of documents across the table. 15 years ago, shortly before Brightwood Industries avoided bankruptcy through a game-changing IPO, an anonymous proposal was mailed in. That proposal became the blueprint for the company's public offering. He turned another page. The patent was filed under the pseudonym E.B. Sinclair, assumed at the time to be a consultant or strategist. Joseph scoffed. "What does that have to do with anything? It was Dad's company. Dad's plan." Mr. Alden calmly flipped to the next sheet. "It has everything to do with this, Mr. Brightwood. Forensic analysis has confirmed the original drafts, the ink composition, the handwriting, the timing of the postal submissions. And the truth." He let the words hang in the room, sharp as a blade. Mr. Alden slid a certificate across the table. "The pseudonym," he said, pointing toward me, "was hers." The room gasped. Even the air seemed to pause. "This," he continued, lifting the framed certificate, "is formal recognition of Eleanor Brightwood as the sole intellectual contributor to patent number 1/229-4157B, also known as the Brightwood stabilization model. That patent currently generates residuals through multiple licensing streams, about $9.4 million each year." Catherine, my granddaughter, dropped her phone. Joseph's wife clutched at her scarf. Joseph himself just stammered. "She made soup. She mended socks." Mr. Alden allowed himself the faintest smile. "Yes. And she also saved your father's legacy." He drew out a folded letter from another envelope, aged at the edges but still crisp. He cleared his throat and read aloud. "She found the cure before the world knew it was broken. He kept quiet because she loved me. I asked her to let me take the credit because the board would never follow a woman. But I knew. Always knew. This company is her mind on paper." A sharp intake of breath came from the back of the room, the kind that belongs to someone who realizes everything they believed has just shattered like glass. Joseph muttered under his breath. "What was that?" I asked, meeting his eyes. For the first time that morning he looked up at me. "I didn't know," he whispered. His voice was smaller than I remembered, almost a boy's again. "I sold the house that spring, not out of anger, just because it no longer felt like mine. Some walls hold too much noise. I moved to a small place by the sea in Santa Barbara. Wide windows, waves outside, peace inside. The patent royalties kept coming, but I used them to start something quiet. A foundation called Women Who Were Erased. Scholarships and recognition for those who built in silence and were forgotten loudly. On my door I hung a sign, carved from an old oak. This house was funded by a burden. Enjoy the silence." Inside I kept little. Just one drawing taped to the fridge. My grandson's crayon picture of me beside a giant light bulb with the words, "Grandma, you think better than Google." I never forgot that. I never forgot how to think. They buried me in assumptions, but I wasn't fading. I was waiting for the right moment to speak. If you've ever felt overlooked or pushed aside, remember, your story isn't over until you decide it is. She wasn't just a wife or a mother. She was the mind that drew the map. And when they erased her, she rewrote the ending. And if my story stayed with you, tap that like button and subscribe. It lets me know you're here, and it helps this story reach the people who might need it most.